Hey guys, welcome to the New Day podcast. Before we kick off, go ahead and like and subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a future episode. And I promise you today, we are not going to talk about politics. A lot of you probably relieved about that, but we're going to talk about, I think it's an important topic in our day, just mental, spiritual, emotional health. Here at New Day Oak Forest, which is the church that we help pastor, we're going through a summer deep dive, which is just a class where we are kind of zeroing in on this topic for 7 weeks. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about, and I think it's really important for us to talk about this topic kind of in our day specifically.
Yeah. And so, no politics today. I like that. Thank goodness. So I think this topic we're talking about today, I want to take a moment just to explain kind of why we're talking about topics like this. We're going to talk about it because it matters in a second, but I think this describes the kind of podcast that we want to have and do here. And so this is not like a church leaders podcast, though maybe we do something like that one day. And this is a podcast we want it to be for everybody, like for the believer. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, this is for you. If you're a skeptic and you're not sure what you think about Jesus, and you just want to peer in, this is for you. And we want this to be topics that everybody is thinking about and talking about. And so, like you said, we're doing a deep dive in our church, which is just like a summer-long class, like pressing into this topic with bringing in experts who are experts in this subject matter. But we're doing it because we have noticed it's a need. And so, this podcast is for every person. And so we want to talk about things that everybody deals with. And so this is absolutely one of those things. This is one of those topics that we've both kind of dealt with in different ways, but also every single person that you talk to deals with this. And I always joke that, I get to know people in the church and we kind of get a little bit closer and eventually they open up and they're like, hey, Pastor John, I want to tell you something. I kind of worry sometimes. I struggle with worry. Everyone thinks they worry more than the average person. And I'm like, oh, well, welcome to the club. And, and everyone's like, yeah, I kind of struggle with depression, anxiety more than it looks like I would. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but everybody does. And so I just think I've found as a pastor, even in personal relationships, you can read all the studies and all the data, but every person feels like their emotional and their mental health needs some work. And we group those two things together, which you're going to notice in this podcast, because I think they go hand in hand. By mental health, we're talking about kind of what's happening in your mind, in your brain. There's physical health, which is your body. Then there's mental health, which is your mind, your emotions, your thoughts, your moods, your motivation, just your outlook on life, and how your outlook on life and what you think about things impacts your ability to even do things sometimes. And so we're going to clump those together, but I think you understand what we're talking about. But this is a huge topic today that everyone should be talking about. And I'm excited to dive into it today.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was imagining first of all, podcasts didn't exist in the 1960s, but if they did, this would not be a topic that would be talked about, but it's talked about more so today. It feels like there are just endless books about just kind of emotional, mental health, anxiety, depression. There's podcasts dedicated to it. It's a part of the cultural language. And so, man, let's dive into that. Why do you think that it's more of a topic today? Are things really harder now than they are in the past? Do people struggle with this more than in the past? Why do you think we talk about it today versus more so in the past?
I'm excited for this question because I think we can just kind of pontificate for a little bit because what I'm talking about and what I'm going to say isn't based on any data. Some things will be, but this is one of those ones that honestly I've thought about a lot, because my initial answer is yes, and I'll talk about some reasons why. But then I always go to and maybe you think about this too, imagine living through World War II or World War I or the Great Depression in America, or what civilization and life used to be way back in the day. I mean, life was hard.
Yep.
In the 1800s, just getting through the winter was a big deal.
Winter is coming.
Yeah, literally, I was winter's coming. Store up the food. There's no vaccines. I mean, all kinds of diseases. And so for me, I always think about what life used to have been back in the day when you'd have 6 kids and 3 would make it to adulthood. That was people's life in reality. And so part of me says, in terms of mental health, it seems like it's more today, but I almost feel blasphemous saying that because of how hard life used to be and all the modern comforts that we have. But I will say, I've talked to some mentors, and once again, they're not going back to the 1800s because those people are not around anymore, but people who are maybe twice my age. And I've literally asked the question because I've dealt with some of this stuff myself, and I've talked to different people that are dealing with all this stuff, and I'm like, is it harder today than it used to be? Is mental health more of a thing today? And I've had many people that I trust that are older than me say, yes, it is. Like it is like, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, at least from a public awareness perspective, like we weren't talking about this. And when you would have conversations with people, it wasn't like somebody was like, my mental health is so bad, or it was like emotions weren't as like focused on. And so it wasn't like as much of a conversation topic. And so on one sense, you could say maybe it's worse today. And the statistics would say it is. Like when you look up the data, more people struggle with depression, anxiety, suicide is way higher, and especially among younger people, like they have verified that. And so the data would suggest it is. But what I would say is that even because some people say, well, maybe we're just more aware of it today. Maybe it's always been this way. I think there's a strong case for that probably, that people have always struggled with mental and emotional health. We're just aware of it today. But my thought is like, even if that's the case, which I think it very well could be, what matters is this is a big topic today. It is a big topic. And so we should be talking about it, especially as Christians and pastors, because we exist to love God and love people. And one of the ways that we love people is by helping them in their needs and helping them kind of wade through these things so they can live the life that God has called them to live.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word. And I definitely agree that research has improved, like people, studies are getting better. And so like we're like the issue is becoming more like prevalent in like the common sphere and cultural language. And so, man, I just think when I look at our world, even thinking back when I was a kid, it felt like there was a lot more like unity in society, a lot more trust in like institutions, even like the future, like the future is bright, like I feel like that's not something that like people growing up today, like they don't think the future is bright, they think it's getting worse. And so I think I agree. We're not living through World War II. We haven't done that before, but I do think people are accustomed or have been accustomed to a certain level of prosperity or just like trust in the future. And I feel like that has broken down. I think that does play into kind of mental, emotional health, all these different things that we're talking about. But let's kind of dive more into that. What do you think is like impacting like this issue today versus in the past? What developments, what has broken down? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we can talk about how to have good mental health, and we're going to talk about some of that, but it's like, what are the things that are negatively impacting mental health? And so I made a list of a few things. I mean, one obviously, which is so funny because people are watching this on their smartphone and via social media. And I'm going to say social media. I never lose the irony of that. But yeah, social media and smartphones have been linked to like deteriorating mental health. And so they're saying like, well, why do young people struggle with it more? Because they're more on social media, and every next generation will be more of a digital native, which blows my mind for like my kids, like how much of a digital native they will be. They will grow up having watched their entire life on a smartphone, which will be the first generation. Like I can't go back and like have my kids show me like, January 7th, 1996, what I was doing, but my kids will be able to watch their entire life, which is crazy. But apparently social media and smartphones have negatively impacted mental health, and we can once again pontificate as to why that is. I mean, I think part of it is the things you get exposed to on social media and smartphones. I've also found, and I think music, like pop music has been this way for a long time, but I think social media has really exacerbated this, that like what goes viral isn't substance. What goes viral is just like kind of unique, novel, weird, or edgy kind of things. And so like, I don't know what that is, but like that just like the algorithms are always going to put up what people will watch the most, and they don't care if it's good or bad. And unfortunately, I think with our sin nature, bad tends to be more desired. That's why, you can post something about politics and everybody comments or likes it, or you post something on how to grow your walk with God or how to be more content and like nobody watches it, or you post a Bible verse and nobody comments. Like there's just something about like that. The algo doesn't like that. And so I think that social media.
Did you just call it the algo?
I think that
was good.
Do they call it? I've heard it called the algo before. Is that a thing or no?
It is now.
Well, algo. I made it. That's going to go viral. But yeah. So social media, smartphones have had a bad impact on it. Busyness of life. That's a big one, I think. I do think modern life, we have so many opportunities. We're blessed with opportunities and things we can do and places we can go and how quick we can get there and all that kind of stuff. We can do more today. People probably back in the day were more local. We can be everywhere, whether it's physically by flying somewhere, or I can call friends in New York. I can keep up with every friend I've ever had. I can do a lot of things. Like modern technology has freed us up to like I never go to the grocery store anymore. And like the other day I needed some nail clippers and I'm like, man, back in the 90s, I would have had to go to the store, like Target or something, and get some nail clippers. But I don't have to do that nowadays. Amazon, like I'm like, Amazon is, which, see, they're getting airplay on this right now. Like, but it's such a great product that saves so much time, you know? And so like, but once again, we just fill it with so many more things. And so like, I still have to get nail clippers. That's still in my mind, you know? But I do a bunch more things. So I think people are very busy. I think that has a negative impact on people's mental health. I think also just like a lack of connection to God. I think even if like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, even if the majority of people weren't super close to God, there was an undergirding sense of like belief in God and the stability that brings. And there was this undergirding sense of like, there's a purpose behind everything and God holds it all together. And that has slowly gone away. And you can see it online. You can see it by the influencers of our day and just the worldview they push of like, it's not going to matter. You're going to be dead anyway. Do whatever you want. Like, I think that mindset drives a lot of the weird things people do. It's like, I'm going to live out any fantasy or fetish because I'm going to be dead in 50 years and it's not going to have mattered anyway. Like that mindset undergirds everything. And so I think a lack of a real worldview with God, I think people wake up to how scary that actually is. And they feel that the natural consequence of that on their mental health. It's like, yeah, my mental health stinks. Yeah, I am anxious because nobody has my back. There is no plan. And when something bad happens, I have no real hope. And so, yeah, like that makes me really sad, anxious, and depressed. And so I think that's a huge factor in it. I think also like the studies would say people have less friends today. That's just what the data says, which, I mean, in the church, we have so much community here that I sometimes find that hard to believe, but apparently that's a thing. People are more sedentary today. That's another one. Like we're sitting around, not doing as much, like I said, we're not worried about winter coming. And so it's not like gather the crops, it's like, nah, it's like, I'm just gonna, gather something on Minecraft or something, because that's all I have to do today. And then, like you said, also more of a fragmented society, more polarized. I think you look at America, you look at culture, and this happens everywhere. Like the whole liberal conservative divide seems to happen in every nation today. Things are becoming more global. It's not like nation specific. So I think the world that people are looking out today maybe is different from, like you said, like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where maybe like we're moving towards something positive and communism is getting defeated and democracy is growing and all these kinds of things and all these health advances, all these kind of things are happening. Today, it feels like different. And I think it's because people are looking at the polarization and the fragmentation of every culture, every institution, and saying like honestly, even like I trust God with the church, but I often worry for the church at large with everything going on. I'm like, man, like, gosh, like how bad are things going to get? How divided will things be in the next 30 years? So I think all those things are negatively impacting mental health. What about you, man? Anything else you can think of?
Man, as you were talking, I really do think a big part of it is just like just a negative view toward the future. And I think that impacts a lot. I even think about kind of like the kids right now or the high schoolers who graduated just in the past few years, just having to go through kind of like COVID, and regardless of how you feel or interpret or process that time, I mean, they were kids like their final year or two of school were like all online. Like that's going to have a major impact on kind of like your mental development, spiritual, emotional development, all those kind of things. I also think like, man, just like you were saying, like we live in a time of decadence and a time where people have moved further away from God. And so a lot of people who have grown up or into adulthood now, like they have those childhood traumas of, divorced parents and abuse and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people are in these days still trying to process that, not sure how to process that. And I think that plays into it a lot. So I think all the things you hit are really big. And especially when, smartphones, we talked about that. I get my screen time report every week, and it's scary. Yeah. I say, okay, so like 6 hours a day, or whether it's 2 hours a day or 6 hours a day, like you're just like scrolling this mirage of other people's lives, just sucked into this content that is not edifying for your soul, and that's going to have an impact on your life. But let's make it personal. Let's get personal a little bit, man. How have you talk about your mental and emotional health? What does that look like in your life personally?
Yeah, and this is interesting because I wonder, like we were saying, how much of this is impacted by the changing times. And so I'm like, is this about me personally, or is this more about like how like the changing environment around me has impacted me? Because, and I say that because my first kind of bout with any kind of what I would call mental health or emotional health thing was when I was 28. So I'm 35 now, so 7 years ago. And, you know, but before that, I never had anything like that, man. I'm a generally optimistic person. I've never struggled with depression or anxiety. Like, I mean, I would have like, you know, get dumped by a girl growing up or something. You're kind of down for a couple months. You know, I had that kind of stuff, but never like couldn't get out of it. And I would talk to other people who would deal with those kinds of things. And I would honestly, I mean, I would be empathetic, but I'd always probably, like a lot of people, wonder like, okay, how much of it really is just they're kind of like, I don't know, just need to get over it and just need to toughen up or whatever. And so, you know, for me, like when I was 28, I started having major anxiety. And once again, there's like anxiety where it's like a level of anxiety everybody has of like fear or worry. I started having like legitimate panic attacks. And so that's like where my body is telling me that something is wrong. And so I went through that, and it blew up every sense of what I thought it was like. I mean, it humbled me in every way. And it took me 6 months, 5 or 6 months, to probably feel like myself again. And to me, anxiety is like legitimate anxiety is when like your worry, fear, or anxiety begin to like negatively impact your ability to do normal day-to-day things. I think, and that's what I experienced. It was hard for me to work. It was hard for me to kind of bear a lot of responsibilities that I had. I was having panic attacks and just like in a constant state of like worry. And then I think depression also comes into that, because you kind of get depressed because you're so anxious. And so I dealt with that. And then actually a year ago, so my wife about 2.5 years ago was diagnosed with brain cancer. And the first 18 months of that journey were, I mean, the hardest thing you could imagine. And I mean, so much going through your mind. But I remember the first 18 months of walking with her with this really bad diagnosis, kind of shocked that I didn't have more anxiety. I remember being intrigued that I didn't have a panic attack during that entire time. But then about 18 months in, just the weight of all that, also with dealing with a couple of health issues that I had, man, I went to the lowest pit of my entire life. Like when I was 34 years old, like a little over a year ago, was the lowest moment of my life. And I was like, I just couldn't believe, I was having all kinds, I didn't have panic attacks this time, but I had like all kinds of like body pains. I couldn't stop taking, I had pains all over my body, feeling depressed. I even got on medication for a short season, and very thankful for that. I mean, it was a really intense thing, and kind of talking to my counselor and processing all that. I mean, really the root cause of that was kind of what my wife was going through, and like my inability to adjust to like, you know, not just does my wife have this supposedly terminal diagnosis, but our life has changed. Like, okay, and we're thankful she's alive, she's doing well today, but like there are some limitations to our family now, and that's hard for us. It's like overnight you're a different family. Overnight you can't do as many things as you used to. Overnight there's this whole new component of our life called, you know, this kind of illness that, you know, a lot of people deal with. Like you have your bills and you have your job and you have maybe kids or family, and we have this huge component of our life, which is a very serious illness and limitation that feels like a full-time job at times. And so it just took me down, man. And it really hit me really hard. And, but the good thing I will say, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, is every time I've gone through these things, because it's crazy. Like today, I literally think I'm in one of the best places of my entire life, especially the last few months, because I've been kind of climbing out of this. God always changes things in me, reorients things. I learn things, and it sounds so cliche, but it is true. Like the greatest days come after that. And that happened the first time when I was 28. Like right after that season, that's when like New Day got replanted, and like kind of like, it's almost like something good really comes out of it. God brings something good out of it. But in the moment, it's a really hard thing. And so I think for me, big thing is like anxiety or mental and emotional health will manifest sometimes through panic attacks, and just through like a kind of a nonstop worry or anxiety that kind of negatively impacts my ability to like do the things I normally do as well as I want to do them. And it has become a major component of my life that like I have to manage, I have to invest in. And if I do, I'm okay, you know, but I can't just do whatever I want to do. I have to sleep, exercise, do all that kind of stuff. I have to kind of manage it. And so, yeah, so it's definitely been an impact for me. And those have been some of the ways it's manifested for me. What about you? How does that manifest in your life? Or what is the way you would kind of say, like, what comes to your mind when you hear like James's mental and emotional health?
I would say like my story is one of like suppression, like suppressing that, like this is an important thing to like think about. You know, kind of the way I grew up was just like you just kind of stuff that stuff down, you know, you stuff it down, you grit, you move forward. And, you know, I think especially in my early 20s, like I had that optimism that we were kind of talking about earlier, like growing up as a kid, just really optimistic, never struggled with it. Even in college, just like, man, the future is bright, like great things are to come. And right as I graduated college, that was around the 2008 financial crisis. And so like, it's like we're launching into this world that is like falling apart, you know, as we're launching into it. And I just remember like that optimism just being beat down in me, and then anxiety kind of rising, like kind of in that. And so the next few years of my life really were kind of a struggle with like anxiety and trusting the Lord, and disillusionment with kind of, you know, what I thought were God's plan for my life. And so that was been a big struggle for me. And then, so that was number one. And then number two, like becoming a pastor and opening myself up into the lives and living rooms of people, you know. And so we talked about this before, just kind of sitting in a room with someone who is confessing an affair or some sin or just some like deep issue, like, you know, maybe it's like, you know, alcohol addiction. So you're almost like putting upon yourself, and we all kind of do this as we open ourselves up in community and with others, like we're bringing the anxiety of others onto us. And so
can I say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think you're hitting on something there, especially even for like, this applies to pastors, but probably for anybody. So it's funny you say that, because the first time when I was 28, when I had like my first like kind of set of like panic attacks, I remember uniquely, I had probably never been doing more in-depth pastoral counseling. I remember the week I had my first one, there were basically one couple, someone had confessed an affair. And this isn't happening all the time. This is a regular rhythm of pastors. I don't want to make it seem like every week someone's confessing an affair, but that week somebody had confessed an affair. Another marriage came in just like, hey, I don't think we're going to make it on this. And I don't remember, there was a couple other things going on as well, but I have noticed a correlation between like getting kind of wrapped up in the brokenness of other lives, which most people don't experience. You know, most people, it's like you're managing your own life and maybe you've got a really good friend, but like as pastors, like we get drug into the best and the worst moments of people's lives. And so, yeah, like how many times sitting in a living room or my office with someone whose loved one just passed away. We're planning the funeral and they don't know if they were a believer or not, or they don't know where their loved one is at, and they're like grieving. Like we feel those things because God made us to kind of empathize with people. And so those things. So yeah, I think, so that's a good probably word for pastors or anyone that kind of bears the weight of other people's stuff. Maybe you're like a caregiver to a family member, or like you're like that person in your family that seems to care for everybody. Those people, like we carry the weight of things. You know, Galatians says bear each other's burdens, which we do, but also like you're bearing their burdens. So that means the impact is on you. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just like, I think that's a very real thing. And so, but for you, yeah. So for you, how does that manifest?
So yeah, I think as a pastor, you know, and I think this was, I guess it was kind of like during the COVID season, and also during kind of Halsey's diagnosis. I think I got some mentors' advice to say like, hey, like you need to like process this, and you cannot process it on your own. Like you're supposed to process it with God, but also process it with someone. And so I found a counselor kind of outside of our community, kind of an impartial person. And I remember the first time I met with him was like, you know, he's like, James, like the anxiety you feel, that everyday pressure, like, that's not normal. You're not supposed to feel that. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I just remember coming out of that session, just feeling like that was a big, like warm hug, and just feeling like, wow, like I've confronted this in my life. I'm talking about it with someone that I trust, who's giving me tools to kind of process this. And so since then, it's just been a journey of kind of learning myself more, and also learning the tools for kind of how do you stay spiritually healthy. So let's talk about that. You know, for anyone kind of watching, maybe struggling with anything that we talked about, anxiety, depression, or hopelessness, or anything like that. Like, how do you stay mentally healthy, physically healthy, spiritually healthy? How do you make that a rhythm in your life? Let's give them some tools they might use.
I love how you said, or your counselor said, that isn't normal. I think that's a good word for anyone watching this, is to know like that's not normal. Like what we're feeling, or I mean, it's normal in a sense. It's normal to feel that way, but it's almost like an indicator. And that's what I've learned to use my anxiety when it pops up as a blinking light of like, you know, hey, check engine, something's going on, like something needs to be addressed. It's a gift to know that, because sometimes we're disconnected to what's happening inside of us because we're so focused on everything outside of us. And so I think that like, it's good to like feel that, but yeah, we want to take note of that, and we want to address it as Christians. we want to have good mental health. We want to respond accordingly to the things that are happening. Because what I've learned is like, so I'm in a season right now where like my wife has brain cancer, and that's really, really hard to deal with. And so honestly, I'm somewhat at a disadvantage from other people because I've had seasons of my life where I wasn't dealing with that and other people were, right? And so it's not like, so I say that because like, if you're here watching this and like, you're really struggling with mental health, or you've been through some crazy things, like I know people have been through like abuse or sexual abuse, or maybe like just their career has been a lot harder for them than it has for us for whatever reason, because the market that they're in. There's a lot of reasons why you can be down. And it's not like a spectrum of like, well, my mental health is here and your mental health is here, so I'm doing better than you. Like, no, it's like what's happening in your life. But the hope is, regardless of where we're at, whether we think that we kind of generally have better mental health or not good mental health, or we're struggling with our emotions, is like we're doing the things that we can within our power and our control to be as healthy as possible in the situation that we're in. That's the hope. And so this should not be condemning to anybody. So what some of those things are for me, and I try to pick the ones that I feel like are also very general. And so like there are some specific things to me that I didn't want to mention because it's like very random to me. Like swimming in like, you know, like water, like natural bodies of water, I'm really into, but like that's kind of random, right? And so a few that are normal. One for me is rest. Like everybody needs rest. Everyone's created to rest. You need to be mindful as to how you're resting physically as well as mentally and spiritually. So like, yeah, like you need roughly 8 hours of sleep. That's what people say. And you're a human, and like sleep is a good thing. We all have to do it. Even if like, well, I only need 5 hours of sleep. Well, you still need good sleep, right? And so everyone needs rest. I think we're obviously usually just going so hard. And I think once again, with social media and smartphones, like it doesn't allow our minds to shut off. And so like we think we're vegging by being on our phone, but our mind is radically stimulated by that. And so we need to rest from these things. Like it's good to be bored sometimes. It's good just to sit in your room and stare at the ceiling. And even with my kids, like this is once again a specific thing, but like we don't do any screens when we go on trips. Like I literally watch my kids like watch the raindrops race down the window. Like I saw my son, my 3-year-old doing that, you know. That's one of our things we don't, because like they're like, we're bored. I'm like, okay, good. You know, like that, it's good because you think about stuff when you're bored, and you write a song in your mind or something, you know, and so you do things. So rest is a really big one for me. Like whenever I had my first bout with anxiety, I implemented a Sabbath in my life, which has become a more common topic in the church today, which once again is because we're all dealing with this. A dedicated day off a week where I'm not working and I'm kind of reflecting on my life and thinking about things and maybe doing something fun that I want to do, or doing some errands, because I actually find errands, like running errands, kind of life-giving. Maybe back in the day I would have liked going to get the nail clippers from Target, you know, actually. But I like doing those kind of things. Just something, a change of pace, you know. Yeah. I'm not trying to be super dad on my day off. I'm not trying to be like super pastor on my day off. It's just a day of rest, and the Bible calls us to do that. Literally the top 10 commandments and the 10 commandments in Exodus 20, one of those is having a Sabbath day where you don't work. It's kind of a day given to the Lord. And so once again, not a new thing, but something I think that we're rediscovering because it's so important. So I think resting, having rhythms of rest. And once again, if you're saying, well, I just can't rest, I'm like, you have to figure that out. Like you can't accept that. And, you know, I even see how it negatively impacts people's marriage. Like they don't have time for each other, or they don't have time to think about what's going on. Like you have to have time to rest. It's got to become a non-negotiable in your life.
Can I dive in? So like real quick, you were talking about like people resist, like people know they need things, but then we like resist it. Because I've talked to people, it's like, hey, like you need to do this. Like why do you think we resist that if we know we need to do it, but then that we just like dig our heels in and we're like, I'm not gonna rest. Or I just don't have time for the word. Like just stuff like that. Like why do you think that happens? Honestly,
I think it's what we're talking about. It's anxiety. Because think about what anxiety is. Anxiety is what you feel when like the bear is coming after you. Like it's a good thing, right? It's like, I got to get away. Like there's an all intense thing. But I think, like I've heard it said, like when your entire life feels like a bear is coming after you, like that's what so it's like, I can't rest because like I'm being attacked by like my life and my work and all these things, and we're not going to pay bills. And so it's like, the things that like you said, like whenever like the bear's coming after you, you're not like thinking about like date night, you know, or you're not thinking about, you know, am I emotionally connected to my kids? Or you're not thinking about, you know, what did I think about when that person said that to me? How did that make me feel? Like you're thinking like run. And I think for people, I think that they have they're living in a constant state of anxiety where their life is coming after them. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And so once again, rest is the ability to kind of come down from that high, and rest is an act of faith, because like, it's almost like you got to kind of let the bear eat you, because it's like, yeah, like I won't get as much done in this way or that way, but the ROI of resting and my mental health in the long game is going to be much better. So that's a big part of it. We kind of talked about this a little bit too. I think also like processing your life and situation. Like I've heard, I think it's in the E-Myth. It's like a famous business book where he talks about people that are really good at business. They don't work in the business, they work on the business, or they're not always working in it, they're working on it. And so it's not just like I'm making sure like if I work I have a restaurant that I'm working in it, like, okay, yeah, today is Tuesday and people came in and we got them food and we charged them money and we got through the day. But like, how can our processes be better? How can we market better? Like, you're thinking about the big picture of things. And I think a lot of people really don't take time to reflect about their life, to get away, to process. And so for me, I do once or twice a year, I do like a getaway where I go away by myself for a day or 2 or 3. I love going to the hill country, you know, here we're in Houston, so it's kind of outside of Austin, and it's beautiful. And it's kind of weird sometimes to go off on a trip by yourself, like without friends or wife or kids, but I do it. And I just kind of think about my life and where I'm at. And I come back into my life after that, like, okay, these are the big things I'm focusing on. Like these are the wounds where I need healing, or this is what God is doing in my life. This is where my time needs to go. I get out of the chaos to kind of think about the big picture of things. And so I think a lot of people, once again, like they're always kind of being chased by the bear. And so it's like they don't have time to kind of think about like just their life in general, but your life in general is what you're experiencing. And so that's a big thing of like really processing your life and just like thinking about what's going on and like asking, hey, God, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing in my life? What do I need to be mindful of? And then there's a lot more we could say. I mean, one I would say is community, like talking about it. We both have counselors. Like one of my counselors is actually the one doing our deep dive. And so we talk to it about somebody and we get perspective from somebody who understands the mind and emotions. And this is a good plug for like, probably your pastor is not a counselor. And that's what I learned. I'm not a counselor. I listen, I love you and I care. I want to pray for you. I want to know, and I can give you some advice, or I can tell you what the Bible says about that. But that's different. Counselors understand how the mind works. They study the mind. So same way like a physical doctor like understands how the body works. And so they know, hey, you're experiencing this pain, you need this medicine or this procedure. Counselors or therapists are people that understand the mind, how the mind works. So you face abuse and the mind does this, or you face abuse and the mind gets stuck in this pattern. Here's how you unwind that pattern. And that's something that like your really good friend or often even a pastor doesn't know. We don't understand that part of it. And so they help you kind of untwist your mind a little bit, which all of us need, because life has wounded and twisted all of our minds. I mean, we've all been impacted by everything we've been through, and it's just important to kind of process things. And so like I said, I have a counselor. I highly recommend that. Last thing I would say is, and this can come off, I'm sure, a little cliche, is like following and trusting Jesus with your life. Like that's a huge one, because a lot of times I found for me, and this is why Christians still struggle with mental health, because we still struggle to follow Jesus in all of life, and we still struggle to trust Jesus in all of life. And I don't want to say that just because you follow and trust Jesus, that like everything in your life is going to be perfect and you're not going to have any mental or emotional health issues. You will, but I think you will address them and confront them in the healthiest way possible. Yes. And I found when I struggle, it's because it's a part of my life that maybe I don't trust God enough with. It's easy to think you trust God, and then when you think like you might actually die, like what do you really think about what happens when you die? You know, you haven't, like if you've never really been through some of these things, or if you haven't faced enough hardship, which looking back when I first became a pastor at 24, man, I smile because I'm caring for this community with these huge needs, and I had no idea. I never felt anything that deep in my life. And so I'm over here just like give people Bible verses, and then they need a hug, you know, they need someone to cry with them. Like when someone tells me they deal with deep anxiety or depression, or now if someone tells me like their loved one has been through something horrible, I'm like, I just know that so deeply, you know? And so I think that like, you're still going to have those things in your life, but when you follow Jesus and trust him, it helps you to address it in the healthiest way possible. And it so one example would be like, if I'm following Jesus, I'm going to be Sabbathing and resting regularly. right? And so that means also then that that's going to help my anxiety. So just everything that you do to follow Jesus is helping your mental health. Like if you're forgiving people, they've wronged you, you need to forgive them. You're just doing that naturally when you follow Jesus, but that helps your mental health. And so you can't find anything that Jesus calls you to do. I really don't believe that, like, that makes you, that doesn't help your mental health. And the final thing is just like the big picture, trusting him, because sometimes you can't understand what's happening in your life. And sometimes you can rest all you want, you can do all these things and you're still going through it. When you trust God, like that's like the ultimate trump card. And you're still wrestling with stuff, but it's like, I don't understand this. I don't know what happens with this. Like, I don't know what happens with my wife's diagnosis. I'm not God. Like, I'm not sovereign. I don't know what happens with my kids or myself or the church. I don't know. And I can try to do things as well as I can, and I'm still not in control. But in the end, God's in control. And if I can stay rooted in that place and have faith in him, then my mental health and emotional health are so much more stable. And so once again, resting or taking a step back at times or processing your life, that's the thing I always come back to. So like I create space to get back to the place where it's like, I trust God with New Day Church, or I trust God with my family. I trust God with my life, and that I'm not going to mess it up or take a wrong turn or miss out on something that he had for me. Like I can mess things up, but God never messes things up. And so God, like I trust God. And I just think like, if you can really come to a place where you trust God, like it's rational because you're not in control. So trying to live a secular life, trying to live like God isn't there, you can't have that and then like peace in your heart, because there is no peace, because there is no hope. You have no hope, you know, and you have no one that has your back. You're going to live in a constant state of anxiety. And so even the fact that we desire good mental health and we desire to feel good in of ourselves, I really shows that like we are designed to believe in God and that he is there, because you can't have that without him. It really is like a God-sized heart in your mental health. Like we have one of those, not just in your heart, but in your mental health. And so coming back to like that faith in God means that like, man, I'm going to do all the healthy stuff, but in the end, no matter what, like I really trust in God. I think that's the number one thing you can do for your mental and emotional health. And I've experienced in my own life that it really helps me.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to add to that. That was really good. I think the three things that I would say is maybe like pressing a little bit to something you mentioned, like the Bible does talk about this. And so maybe this is for someone out there who maybe isn't as like open to kind of this conversation. Cause you know, like maybe you're more like me where you're just like, you kind of stuff, you suppress, you're like, I'm just going to grit through. I'm a strong person, you know? And I just want to remind people that like the Bible does talk about this, all the things we've talked about. It talks about depression, talks about fear, talks about anxiety, talks about like forgiveness, you know, as we wound one another. And so like, how do we process like forgiveness? How do we process like bad things that happen in our life or bitterness? And so there are verses all across the Bible, and that they should be there because God knows humans, because he made us, and he knew that like living in a fallen world and sin, we'd be wounded. And so he gives us these verses like, do not be anxious. And he helps us like process these things. And so that's my first encouragement is like, we go to God because God understands us. And Psalm 139 says like, basically go to God for self-understanding, right? Yeah. You cannot understand yourself without like God being a part of that conversation, because he made us. That's number one. Like the Bible talks about it, therefore we need to talk about it. And number two, the way I phrased it, I thought this was good. And you hit on it, maybe just summarizing, like you have to get into your head and you have to get out of your head. Like if you want to be mentally healthy, like there are times to go into your head, like with someone, and to process things. But I kind of counsel people like, that's not the only thing you're supposed to do, because your head is like, you go into your mind, it's like just a maze. And so like, even sometimes as I'm talking to my counselor, I'm processing things about myself, I'm like, it's like a maze. Like, I don't know what's going on in there. And so like, there's a point where you're like, okay, I need to do this. But there are also other times, like you said, where you just need to go exercise. You need to get out. You need to get out of your head. And that's really important for mental health as well. And so like, I'll take maybe like twice a year, I'll go and just like, man, I'll just like drive to another city. Like I go to Brenham. Not a lot of exciting things in Brenham. It's a nice little town, but I'll go there, go to a coffee shop. And there's something about like, I see in my rearview mirror, like the city, like Houston, like leaving, you know, and I'm like, I'm already feeling less anxious, you know? So like you have to do those kinds of things to get into your head and also get out of your head. And that's a good rhythm, I think, for us to take. And you gave a lot of examples of that. And then last one, I just call it building your team. like, who is your team? And, as I think about the team for my life, basically, who are the people that are like helping me be successful, the person that God is calling me to be? And there's all kinds of people that we do that with. I was thinking like our dentist is a part of our team, and our doctor is a part of our team, and hopefully our community group is a part of our team. And also I've added in recent years, like a counselor to my team, because I want to be successful. I want to make it to the end. I want to be the best dad and husband and Christian and just follower of Jesus that I can be. So I'm building a team to make that happen, And so basically it's like you're saying, not just work in your life, everyday grinding, but like take the time to take a step back and say, what do I really need to be like a healthy individual, a healthy follower of Jesus, and put those things in on your team.
So I want to comment on a couple of those things you said. It was so good. Yeah, I think, because I kind of brushed over it, but like having a great church, like sometimes it feels like the community that we have here, it's like this oasis in the middle of like just a chaotic world that we live in. And you could talk to any person that's like engaged with our church and a part of the church, and like it adds value to their life. It helps them. It's positively impacting them in every way, including their mental and emotional health. And life is so uncertain to not take advantage of like the guaranteed wins. Like I said, if you get 10 points for writing your name on top of the test, like you got to take that, and that's what the church is. And so I think a big one is like having like a healthy church community, people that you're walking with regularly, and the beautiful of like the normal rhythms of like community group or Bible study or gathering every Sunday with your church. We talk about never miss church, is like, I know I'm going to be there. I know I'm going to be in the room. I know I'm going to hear a sermon. I know I'm going to try my best to sing along with the worship music. I know I'm going to read the scripture. I know I'm going to see people. Like I know that experience is going to happen in my life. And so that's just so important, is to have those people in your life. And I love getting out of your head too. Yes. Like, yeah, you need to process, but also like sometimes you got to shut it off. And like, even for me, like sometimes my Sabbath is just like, I go do something fun. Yeah. Like, I don't want to think about it. Like my mind needs time to rest. It's like your body needs time to rest. Your mind needs time to rest. And I do think, you can overdo it. You can probably overdo counseling. You can overthink things in your life. And so you need to find the healthy rhythm to where it's like we don't want your mental and emotional health to consume your life, because that's what can happen. Like sometimes in a pursuit to help it just kind of consumes everything. You want it to get better. You want it to get more stable, more hopeful, more understanding of yourself and others, but not like to where like you're obsessed. Like, okay, I'm an Enneagram 3. I know my Enneagram, but I'm not obsessed with Enneagram. I'm like, well, what does that mean for me? Oh, when I was 5 and I was a 3, that means that, like you can kind of go way down that rabbit trail. So it's almost like we're pursuing good mental health, and all these things can help. But that was really a caveat, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We need our church community. We need these things to keep us strong. And then you were talking about anxiety. That's the problem with anxiety, is your mind's in overdrive. Yeah. It's always in overdrive. So you need times where you're giving it rest. So awesome conversation. Any final thoughts you want to leave with anyone?
Man, I love this conversation. Encourage you to maybe comment on this video if anything resonated with you, or or tell us some of your story. We read all the comments, the good and the bad ones, I
was going to say, like, share with a friend. Yeah. It's like, hey, you look like you could use this conversation.
Yeah. That's a bit of just sharing in general. Like just sharing it on your stories or something. It's just not like directed at one person, but that one person will hopefully see it.
Yeah.
And so, no, man, I think my thing is just like pursue good mental and emotional health. And ultimately, the most important thing we can do in that is trust God. And once again, I know that can sound like a cliche answer, but it really is, I think, the thing that brings all these things we're talking about together. We trust God, we trust He's with us, and that's why we go to the counselor or we go to church or we take a Sabbath, is because like ultimately we're trying to follow His plan, which is good. Life is hard, but God is good. And so we should pursue mental health, and we should pursue being the kind of people that are really a light in the world. Like my hope for myself with what I've been through is like, I'm a light in the world, and I encourage people that go through hard things. And because I've gone through things, like I can be more of an encouragement to them. I'm not like the pastor that doesn't get them. I get it, And so pursue good mental and emotional health. Don't settle for kind of where you are. Trust the Lord. And man, it's a great conversation. And once again, thankful for you sharing your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as promised, no politics. So catch us next time. Can't wait to see you.
Another episode of No Politics.